your eye shades, earphones like this. There's a playlist called the Johns Hopkins psychedelic playlist. It's available on Spotify and everywhere else. That Bill Richards.
Okay.
And so that's on. That's consistent across the research everywhere with Hopkins, and it. I have a little prescription for psilocybin from the pharmacy at Johns Hopkins, a Schedule 1 drug, and get that and take that and take it in a little. It looks like a chalice. It wasn't a chalice, but it looks like a chalice. Take that, drink a little water, and sit back and lights and colors and like okay, and here we're going, and it's pretty, but at some point, an hour in, I don't know, I feel this circular on my left side. This circular energetic. It's a symbol of pilgrimage. Whatever that energy is drops to my lower spine, starts coming up my spine. I didn't have the language then, but it's chakras. I didn't have that language. Comes up and gets stuck right here. This energetic, strong energy, and it stops right here. And it's building, and I'm starting to get nervous because I think this has got to come out. It's going to come out my mouth or my ears. I thought my Adam's apple was going to explode. So at that point, one of the facilitators,
Kind of physical. I mean,
it was not sort of, it was dramatically physical, and I was starting to get nervous about it.
You're listening to The Thinning. Let's see what opens up.
Where are you? Where are you located right now?
I'm on the Georgia coast in Savannah, Georgia, and it's chilly here, but it's not cold. The birds are still out, so it's a good microphone, but there are definitely several birds out right out the window. I'm in the guest room of my house and home office in Savannah.
I like it. I like it. I love Savannah. I love the foodie scene there, and I love the Spanish moss everywhere.
Yeah,
so,
I know.
But chiggers usually go with the Spanish moss.
They do.
So,
They do.
yeah.
That's right. That's a lesson everybody has to learn. Messing with that stuff, they got to get some chigger bites on them. Yeah. So but it's a beautiful place. Happy to be here.
Well, we're talking today because a mutual friend connected us, and let's just start really early. First of all, you're clergy, correct?
I'm no longer a priest in the Episcopal Church, but I served the Episcopal Church as a priest for 20 years.
Okay.
And just recently resigned my ordination as part of the work, just as a result of the work I'm doing or as a result of some other things. But yeah, still, I'm Episcopalian Christian, and 20 years served the service of the church as a clergy.
And that's a tough call to make because that's a difficult ordination to get. Yeah.
Yeah. And
so there's a story there, I'm sure.
There is.
Right. But we don't need to get into it right off the bat.
No, we can get there. We can get there in the conversation.
But I'm really more interested in just kind of, your spiritual beginnings, what was your first big spiritual awakening experience when you were young?
Yeah, God, thank you for asking that, because that's an important part of everyone's journey, I think, and it doesn't get asked or thought about too much. So I grew up in a small town in Kentucky near Lexington. Grew up town of 5,000 people. Grew up on the edge of town. Grew up with fields, tobacco fields, and cow pastures behind us. We were still in town, but really close to nature, and so I spent a lot of my childhood outside. A lot of time, and then in the mountains of eastern Kentucky as an older kid, camping and hiking, and so I grew up right on the edge of the mountains, so not in the mountains, but I could see them. And one of my earliest memories is standing and looking out at the mountains and just couldn't stop staring at them. So I just have always had a appreciation of the beauty of creation, I guess, and always a connection to nature and finding God's presence. As a little kid, I would really be careful about stepping on sticks. And I guess I was a bit of a Christian animist or an animist. I felt really such a strong connection to God when I was in nature, and spent just a lot of time on staring up at the sky on my back as a little kid. So that was my first experiences of awe and connection to something beyond myself and beauty. So that was a very important part of my spiritual formation.
And that turns into church membership and eventually a clergy relationship.
Yeah.
How?
Later. So I grew up in a family we went to church. We were not overly, we were there most Sundays, but grew up in the Disciples of Christ, and then, which is my mother's family church, and then eventually moved to the Episcopal Church where other parts of my family were, but grateful for that early formation and that tradition that was ordaining women long before the Episcopal Church was, and had a real, I mean, it's congregation by congregation, but it was a very open-minded congregation in the Bible Belt. So, and then the Episcopal Church was too. So, and the centrality of the Eucharist was, I think, I wouldn't have known that then, but both those denominations every Sunday have communion. And so I remember as a little kid looking, first in the Christian church, which used little shot glasses, looking through the communion cup and through the end of the world. I just, some kind of weird little thing I did. And then when I go to the Episcopal Church, just going up to the altar rail, that time kneeling at the altar rail, there was just something powerful about that. So I've always had a very Eucharistically centered theology, which is inside baseball sort of language, but the Eucharist has been central. So went to college, went to work for Delta Airlines, eventually went to work for an advertising agency as a copywriter, with always with this nagging feeling of ordination and leadership in the church and helping other people have experiences of God. And was a member of a church in Atlanta called Church of the Holy Comforter, where 80% of the congregation lives with severe and persistent mental illness. Was a parishioner there for 5 years on the vestry, drove the bus to pick people up. We had an arts program on Tuesdays and Thursdays with wood turning and painting and poetry and an organic garden and a meal 2 days a week. And then Wednesdays we had church in the evening, and I would go pick people up. So I just, over time, in deep relationship with people way out on the margin, and not as a do-good project, but in real community. Kind of the Larch model, if you know that, where you're in service to people. So anyway, that was where I was like, oh my God, the church still has some life in it. Has the power to be transformative for people, respecting the dignity of people. So I went to
I don't mean to bring up his name. It's kind of a sore subject with when I'm talking to an Episcopalian, but as a Methodist, I'm John Wesley comes to mind, and I remember clearly a sermon at an annual meeting that was preached by a mentor of mine who just constantly pointed out that for Wesley, the centerpiece of his spirituality was visiting in the homes of the poor, and to the extent where I believe he had to be deliced 3 times in his life. So
Right.
It wasn't just kind of, hi, how you doing? It was real community with poor people and people on the margins, and that's not something that's really part of Methodist life in America these days.
It's not part of mainline Christian. It's not part of any. I don't know where Black church. I mean, there's still pockets, but that was my first experience of that. I mean, I grew up in a small town, so I knew a lot of poor people, knew a lot of rich people. But that was as an adult, that was the first time I really was in deep relationship with people that were really struggling, and it was mental illness, and they lived in group homes, and it was the church is still doing its thing, and that was in such an important place for me. And so I went to seminary with that energy of relationship with people on the margins, and then went to seminary, and then was ordained at 40, and then just started serving more conventional churches. So I think
I'm curious about the mental illness piece. So a lot of us, I think, take a charitable position towards poverty and towards mental illness, and there is just a kind of we should help those people, just like white people want to help Black people, where Black people don't need help or don't want our help. I remember being at a presentation at a big annual national meeting where the speaker was from Black Lives Matter back when that was first being formed, and she said, "We don't want your help. This is our battle." And I don't know if that's really the attitude of the organization, but this is what this speaker said. She said, "We don't really want your help, white people. Every time you get involved in it, you mess it up." And I've become aware of the white savior problem, and it's really tricky. I hated hearing that. I absolutely hated hearing that, because I always want to be part of the solution to any big problem, and believe that's a calling we all have, but it is problematic, and there's another reason for doing it. Did you how did you grow spiritually through your connection? How did those mentally ill people save you, in other
Well, that's
words?
exactly right, and I think that's where I've seen a lot of churches do outreach, and I mean, lots of good things are happening.
Sure.
But it's what it there. It was not going to help you. It was, we are going to be in relationship with you, and we're going to eat meals with you, and we're going to kneel at the altar rail with you. And if you're able, you're going to be the acolyte, or you're going to do the reading. Me, guy that has a job and arrives by car, is going to sit in the pew and just be a part of this and help in ways I can, and contribute and drive the van, which I could do, things I could do, but giving them the whatever they could do and wanted to do, they got to do, and the rest of us filled in the gaps. And that was a totally different model, and it really does come out of the Larch model of service in community, and that's rare. And I miss. It's hard to find that kind of situation, and but it there's a line in the Episcopal Church, and I'm sure the Methodist Church has a similar thing in the baptismal rite, and it's, do you respect the dignity of every human being? And that was a key. I would tear up sometimes when we'd have a baptism there, and we would say it, because that's what people, many poor people, many mentally ill people, are not given dignity. I mean, it's a bad combination. Poor, mentally ill, not any resources, living in a group home, and to have a church community that lifts you up, or just not lift you up, just says we're equal, and what can we do together? It was
And
powerful.
I think so much about how Jesus is the focal point of all of our churches, ostensibly, but we don't read the accounts of his life, and we don't dig deeply into the fact that he did exactly that. That's what he did, and what he told us to do. He was identified with criminals and traitors and lepers, and and to the point where the religious leaders of the day called him out on it constantly, and he always had a good comeback. He wasn't like, well, gosh, I don't know, I'm just doing my thing. It was bold, and yet that's not part of our practice really anywhere, except for what I think what you're describing, right?
Right. Well, right. And they think, just thinking about the creedal statements that in your tradition, mine, and in they don't, the creeds do not mention, they credential Jesus, but they don't mention anything of what he did and anything about his ministry. And every week after week after week, that's what people repeat. And it forms us in ways that I think are not really in the way of Jesus, not just the
Yeah, so
creed, but
we're gonna step outside of the box here just a little bit, and we're gonna explain to the non-churched viewer, which I think I'm hoping that there are.
good.
There is there is a thing that we do in Christian worship in the mainline churches, and these Methodist, Episcopal, Presbyterian, the churches that you kind of see on every corner, especially in the South. There's this thing we do where we often recite a creed, which is kind of, I believe this and I believe that. And one of the most interesting of those and most popular is what we call the Apostles' Creed. And gosh, Hunt, I was in my 40s, maybe even close to 50, before it dawned on me. In the Apostles' Creed, it says, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified. That the entire life of Jesus between birth and death is absent. There is no interest whatsoever in this, this little simple thing that we say every Sunday. It has absolutely no interest in the actual person and teachings of, and taking the human being seriously, of Jesus, this guy that we ostensibly worship. Ever notice that?
And follow, and which makes it really easy to say, okay, well, he's special. I don't have to do any of that stuff, and let him go, put him on a pedestal instead of following him, which is really, you think about with the state of Christianity.
And there's some notable theologians of the 20th century. I'm thinking of I always get them confused. H. Richard Niebuhr or Reinhold Niebuhr,
Yeah.
who just basically said, and this again, trying not to go inside speak here too much, but to tell the viewer, there's some major thinking in Christian churches in the 20th century that says, you can't follow that stuff. It's too hard. The individual can't do any of that stuff. Maybe you could do it in community, maybe, but it's really not practical. It's really more of an aspirational kind of thing. I don't know. That seems self-defeating and rather toxic to me. Did it ever ring that way with
Yeah,
you?
well,
I'm
yeah. I
wondering.
mean, once I finally started paying attention to the Bible and started paying attention to the teachings of Jesus in a more of an adult way, well, even as a kid, but especially as an adult, and in community with people on the margins, like we're not even doing. I mean, yeah, we rationalize every difficult teaching of Jesus. We somehow rationalize away, and maybe remember that Jesus loves me. This I know, but don't remember, and then forget that means it has to be extended back out to everybody else. Just just the core teachings of Jesus are not taught. If they are taught, they're ignored, and it's for an hour a week in a church, and then the rest of the time we're bombarded by everything else: consumerism, cult of celebrity, meanness, division. It's like so. The media takes the media narrative, the consumer narrative, the America exceptionalism narrative takes the lead, and poor old Jesus is sort of kept in a little box on Sunday morning and barely let out of there. In some churches, never let out of the box. Um, so anyway, yeah, it's
I took up motorcycling post divorce a few years ago, and we would go. I would go on some Sunday mornings. Hey, out to Poolesville, Maryland, and partake in the Bikes and Breakfast meeting, which was just where a bunch of guys on motorcycles rode up and sat in a parking lot and munched on a egg McMuffin and talked. And I swear to you, I had so many more. I can't even count, but so many more spiritual conversations there than I would ever have. It was almost like in church, a real spiritual heart to heart, especially between men, was off limits. It wasn't. It was not even.
yeah, oh yeah,
It wasn't. It wasn't something you did. It was if you did that, then you were demonstrating some kind of maybe you're too woo woo or, you were aberrant in some way. Whereas the motorcycle guys, we could go deep, and we did go deep every single time we met. We went and we were talking about big issues of, life and consciousness and, emotion and just all the things. And, yeah, that's where I kind of saw something in comparison. You have these experiences where you see it one way, and then you go back and look at, I'm not, and it helps kind of offset or the kind of thing that you think is normal, right?
yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah. Well,
Well,
go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't mean to
just
cut
real
you
quick,
off.
just about the one of the gifts of the last few years for me has been a group of men that I meet with once a week on the phone. There's 7 of us total, and we gather twice a year together for a few days. But the weekly check-in, I think from age like 45 to 80. There's a couple of guys that are in their early 80s, and then the rest of us are somewhere in the middle. Some clergy, some therapists, and that has been a lifeline for me. It has been so because that's just that same idea. Like we're just coming, and something about if you can be on and we're honest with each other, and people really let down their guard. Men have to let down their guard, and it's hard for us to do.
Yeah,
It's a,
one of my grand theories is that men generally have to have something to triangle around. We have
yeah,
to have, we can't just sit and talk, the two of us. We have to find a podcast to, as a reason to talk.
right.
We have to jump on a motorcycle and you think about motorcycling as a solitary experience, but most of the guys have this thing in their helmet, it's a microphone and a transceiver, and you hauling it down the road and doing the twisty turns, and then you're talking about one of my best friends, we always talked about recipes. I think we was always talking about
That's
different ways to cook salmon while we were riding our big motorcycles.
that's cool. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's just it's an interesting kind of phenomenon.
Hmm.
So overall, this gives me a good kind of idea of your spiritual journey. It sounds like as a kid, being in nature and being putting yourself in situations where you could experience the awe of things beyond you. That was important. It sounds like in adulthood, it was a lot about connection to people and especially people on the margins who probably challenged you in various ways.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then I think we both had that experience where it's like the institution that is supposed to hold that experience and knowledge um, didn't seem to. Um, and that's an interesting paradox because to me, because it if it weren't for the church, would we have the story? Would we have the embodied, story that is the saints, shall we say, the people who are doing their best to try to live according to the good teachings. But the institution itself just really falls short. I mean, really falls short.
What if I just said this the other day to somebody that what if, I mean, I do believe this actually, but what if the second coming is actually the church in its fully realized in its own mission and ministry? That when that happens, the reign of Christ, and it's not about converting people to Christianity. It's just the church living fully into its Christ-like calling as a body. And I think there's plenty of scriptural support for that. And without this idea that this dead guy is going to drop back down, which is kind of I think what most people think, like that it's actually about the church is claiming its own Christhood individually and collectively, and out beyond religion. Like there's something beyond all this, and that gives me a little hope. I don't know, and it takes a long friggin' time, and we're living in that. We're living in that this long time.
We
So
sure are.
so
So we're gonna flip through a few pages pretty quickly here because I think if we don't, we're gonna run out of time. But all of that is to set up the reason why we're talking today, which is you participated in the Johns Hopkins study applying.
religious professional study, yeah. So clergy study with psilocybin, yeah.
And first of all, how did you find out about it? What was your decision process? How did all that come about?
I was serving at church in Seattle, Mercer Island, Washington. It was 2015 in the fall, and I was at home in the afternoon flipping through Christian Century magazine, and I saw an ad and a story for the study at Johns Hopkins and NYU. There were two sites, but Hopkins was the advertising site, and looking for religious leaders from all traditions who were in a role as a leader and psychedelically naive. Two things right off the bat, and I check. And then I applied thinking, well, I won't get in because everybody's going to want to do this, but I'll do it anyway. Sounds like fun. Sounds like an adventure. I really thought and this is true, Johns Hopkins cares what clergy think about something. And of course, the mental health stuff was back to my original call, which I put that together later. But like they're curious about what we think about something, I'm in. And so I applied. I didn't think I'd get in, went through some mental health screenings, physical screenings, got accepted. And so we're talking in January of 26. It was January 27th of 16. So it's coming up on 10 years that I had my first session at Hopkins, flew from Seattle to Baltimore. The town already met the team one time before that for the screening. And so the world's leading researchers of psychedelics and mental health, they wanted to see how we responded as people that weren't dealing with anything acute, how we would respond as trained theologians and community leaders, how we would respond to the protocol they've been using for the past 15 years for mental health and addiction, based on the research that had been done in the 40s and 50s and 60s. So I showed up really just for an adventure, honestly. I mean, I didn't have any high-minded theological. I just thought, well, this is cool, and I'd never done it, and I'd been around it. I just had never done it, and
And to your point, it is interesting. People, I think, don't really understand one of the dynamics of being a clergy person, even in a congregation, is that people don't listen to you. And it's right. Am I right or
no,
wrong
that's
about
exactly
that?
right. And
It's people don't. And when somebody, in a big, name brand academic institution wants to hear what you think, it's
that's the
kind of,
truth. That is exactly right. That was big. That was huge. It was huge.
yeah.
A huge part of my motivation. So, and just to thank that opportunity, and it was, they covered all the expenses, and it was just an adventure. So two sessions a month apart with the world's leading researchers. Both sessions found epiphanies, profound insights, profound experiences of God that were not disconnected from other things I'd experienced, but were expanded way beyond that in both sessions. And I knew after the first session that it was going to change my work. I didn't know how, but it had a very, very embodied Pentecostal experience. And I'd been so I didn't go to seminary because I was in my head. I went to seminary because I had experiences of God and wanted that to help other people have that. But through the training and through the challenges of congregational life, and I just started what do I need to read to grow the church? What workshop do I need to go to? So I was so up in my head, so disconnected from my body and my emotional center, and the psilocybin brought me in a very dramatic way back to my body.
So walk us through it. What happened? What was the what set up the scene of doing this, participating in the
Well,
study?
a trip report's kind of like somebody talking about their dream or their vacation, so I'll try to keep it succinct. But I'll to the key points.
In other words, it's not really something you can articulate.
It's hard to articulate, and it was there are a couple things that I think resonate with people. So, your eye shades, earphones like this. There's a playlist called the Johns Hopkins psychedelic playlist. It's available on Spotify and everywhere else. Bill Richards, and so that's on. That's consistent across the research everywhere with Hopkins, and I have a little prescription for psilocybin from the pharmacy at Johns Hopkins, a Schedule 1 drug, and get that and take that and take it in a little. It looks like a chalice. It wasn't a chalice, but it looks like a chalice. Take that, drink a little water, and sit back and lights and colors and okay, and here we're going, and it's pretty, but it's and then
and you're at this point you're thinking, okay, well, interesting, but
yeah. Exactly.
And okay, so this substance that I've ingested is producing,
I'm just seeing
hallucinate. Right. We call it these hallucinatory drugs,
right. Right. So I'm just seeing some weird colors, and
it's seeing some stuff. Yeah,
I'm seeing some stuff, and I'm in a glass case. I mean, blah blah blah. So, but then at some point, an hour in, I don't know, I feel this circular on my left thigh. This circular, energetic. It's a symbol of pilgrimage. I mean, you've seen it. Everybody says it's on petroglyphs in New Mexico. It's just a circle that spirals out like that. And a year before I was in the study, I'd been on a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat. And about day 6, which is the hardest thing I've ever done, about day 5 of that, there's this thing in my left thigh, this circular, energetic thing after I've been meditating for 6 hours a day and struggling. And at that time, that was a year before. I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. I don't know. And then I kind of forgot about it. And then here I am at Hopkins a little over a year and a half later, and the same thing in the same place. And I'm like, oh my God, I remembered it. And I thought 6 days of that meditation, an hour and a half of psilocybin, I get to this same physical thing. So then that moves to whatever that energy is, drops to my lower spine, starts coming up my spine. I didn't have the language then, but it's chakras. I didn't have that language. It comes up and gets stuck right here. This energetic, strong energy, and it stops right here. And it's building, and I'm starting to get nervous because I think this has got to come out. It's going to come out my mouth or my ears. I thought my Adam's apple was going to explode. So at that point, one of the
Kind
facilitators.
of physical. I mean,
Oh,
you're
so it
feeling
was.
it.
Well,
Yeah.
it was not sort of, it was dramatically physical, and I was starting to get nervous about it. I was like, it was like almost like a hairball, but it was stuck right here. And one of my guides touched me on the shoulder, and that was part of the protocol to kind of, if you're struggling. And as soon as he did that, that whatever that was just went up dramatically. It just like I cranked it up 1,000%, and it blew. This is hard to explain, but in this experience, it blew out, that energy blew out through past this and out the top of my head. And then in my memory is I started making these sounds that felt like glossolalia. I felt like I was speaking in tongues in the experience. So I don't know if I was, but that was the experience I had. So my reflection from that afterwards was that I had gotten so up in my head, and I'm an Enneagram 9, if people know anything about that, which is a very embodied but not connected, disembodied, connected, just disconnected from my body. And I was in a bad situation with that. And I think whatever was going on with the psilocybin, with my body, with God, with the spirit, was you've got to start paying attention to your body. Your body keeps the score. Basil Vanderkok. The body's a temple of the Holy Spirit. Paul. So I've not been that disconnected from my body since that. I've really checked in with my body about things, about decisions, about how I'm feeling, what's going on. So that was I'm not. It's hard to explain how important that was, but it was a lifeline to me. And the second experience, a month later, was really more about my ordination and about leadership. But the first one was an opening to a deeper experience of myself and God. So it was so important, so important.
Before we keep going, a quick pause. This isn't meant to be a podcast you listen to passively. These conversations are meant to be carried forward. If something in this episode is raising questions for you, the best place to continue the conversation is on Substack. That's where I share short reflections, episode notes, and where listeners can respond and talk with one another. You can find the link in the show notes. Now, let's keep the conversation going.
Was it unnerving? Was it shattering? Was it disturbing in any kind of way?
No, it was a little unnerving at first when I felt like this was but here I am at the Johns Hopkins Medical Center at the hospital in a room with the medical doctor. I wasn't worried.
One would hope that, you're in good care, but I've spoken with some that seem to say that, that it was, there was pain involved. There was a connection with mourning and grief and pain.
Well, I had that at other experiences later. I had that a little bit of that early. So as those lights were coming up, I was thinking about relationships that were fractured, friendships that I no longer were maintaining. I did have some, and I remember at some point I kind of got in a loop on that, and I remember thinking to myself, that can be dealt with later. Come back. Almost like that was avoidance a little bit. Come back to this experience right now. And so, but yeah, I've since had deep sadness. But again, that's part of we're so avoidant of our sadness.
Well, sure. Yeah.
And we don't need to dwell in it, but sometimes you got to go down to come back up. And so anyway, I think that's an important part of the spiritual life, is to be in the negredo or whatever, in the darkness from time to time.
Two meditation, not even really meditation retreats, but two silent retreats at Thomas Merton's monastery in Bardstown, Kentucky. And the first one that I did, this is years ago. The first one I did was it was just this feeling of bliss. It was like detox, and just bliss and wonder and how incredible. And then the second one I did a couple of years later, I was going through some difficult family stuff, and it was one of the most brutal, awful experiences I've ever had. I remember staying in my room for 24 hours and just not, and this is a monk's quarters that's just a metal bed, with a little thin mattress on it, and just stayed there for 24 hours. Didn't want to leave, didn't want to come out, just sleep as much as possible. And just, so these things they can have a spiritual experience. I'm acquainted with the fact that it can be it can be up, it can be down, and all of it is part of the work you're supposed to be doing at that
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah, I think one of the mistakes we made about Christian spirituality is it's always got to feel good, or you've always like it's all kind of feel good stuff. And the truth of the matter is, I mean, the central story of Christianity is it first begins with a horrible death, and so yeah, there's resurrection, but Jesus had to go into hell, and so do we
And
sometimes.
that narrative that we skip over in the Apostles' Creed, involves some talk of real trial and real pain.
Yeah,
You
exactly,
take up your cross every day and follow me, kind of stuff, which
exactly.
implies that there's work to do, and it may not be all that enjoyable at the time.
Right. So that meditation retreat that I've been on, that 10-day retreat, was a very important part of my own preparation. I didn't realize that then. And it really brought me back to a much so we can talk about this at some point too, but I think one of the things that's really important to underscore about psychedelic engagement is you've got for it to be effective, I think, you've got to have a spiritual container. I mean, I think Christianity is a good one, but you got to have a spiritual container. You've got to have a practice, even if it's just I always said I had a half-assed meditation practice, which is true, and it's still kind of sometimes half-assed. But I came back to it after that first experience. I was locked in because I could get back. I could get back to some of those experiences by settling my body down and stillness, and so that's why I think the religious container is so important for mental health, for one thing, but also for these experiences, these non-ordinary states. You got to have something to come back to from the mountaintop. You got to come
Yeah,
back
and
down.
and and I think the piece that a lot of us miss in religion is, there's a notion that, well, it's my way or the highway. If I'm an Episcopalian, and that's the right way to go, and and we also bristle. I grew up in kind of an evangelical tradition, and there's this bristling about the many roads up the same mountain kind of idea. Where we're all just, God is at the top of the mountain, and we're just different roads going up. Maybe that's as good an image as anything, but I tend to think that really we're just trying to tell stories. We're trying to come up with stories that speak to something you can't speak to. And one story is about as good as another. One story hits on things that the other story doesn't, and no one story can really contain it. And maybe all the stories can't contain it. All the stories combined.
Yeah, right.
Um, yeah. But the story, having a narrative, having a lens through which, a pair of glasses to look at this big grand
Yes.
mystery, and the deeper you go, the deeper it gets. Having a pair of glasses that you can look at all that through is really, it's really
Yeah.
important. And again, how did that connect with my understanding of the people who've done this kind of big heroic dose under supervision of psilocybin? You're being kind of thrust into another place. The blinders are kind of off, and it some people talk about it being kind of a direct experience of the divine. There are a lot of direct experiences of the divine,
Yes.
actually,
Yes.
but this is a particular kind. And how did your Christian glasses, were they sufficient? Did you throw your glasses away?
No, they were
And
they.
and how did that operate?
Yeah, I think my Christian classes were sufficient, and I had also done a lot of other reading of other traditions, and I did know a little bit about sort of the chakra system. So I was, and I think I've heard Richard Rohr say, or somebody say, if it's true in one place, it's true in every place. So I think the world's religious traditions are very unique in their own ways. They have truth for us outside our own traditions. And so my Christian, if Christianity was all I had, it would have been sufficient. It would have been sufficient. And I had some other tools that I've been working with. So, but I don't think I think Christianity is sufficient. Like that was a promise that the words of the Old and New Testament are sufficient for a life of grace. And there's a lot of amazing other things out there. I heard
And
somebody
we can learn from those things, but we also have those things in our. I mean, if we just dig deep enough, and we have a strong mystical tradition in Christianity that that
exactly.
most people don't even know about.
Well, that's been part of my work, is to introduce that to the psychedelic community, who will do anything but Christianity because they've either been harmed by it or they see the dark side of it in the culture, and so it's anything but Christianity. And that's part of the work am doing, but it's just both to introduce the Christian community to the healing from psychedelics, experiences of God, and to introduce the psychedelic community to a beautiful, rich, contemplative and mysterious and contemplative and beautiful tradition that does connect with the other traditions, does connect with Buddhism, does connect with mystical Judaism, does Sufism. So it's and that's where, at that level of relationship with other traditions, past the doctrinal disagreements and arguments, to get to that lower level of spirit, there's an ability to connect at that in the silence. Beautiful, really beautiful.
And so, in a sense, and I'm just going to say this, and you need to correct me, but it sounds as though psilocybin was a kind of a shortcut through,
Yeah, I mean,
past a lot of, hours and hours of meditation, and a kind of a shortcut through all of that.
well,
Yes,
yeah,
no, maybe.
yeah, I'd say, yeah. I mean, it was, I think so, but it was also a bulldozer to get through a big barrier that I had. It was a boost of power to get me through this block I'd had about thinking I could figure things out on my own. And as a researcher friend of mine says, yes, okay, if it's a shortcut, but isn't life hard enough? And I would say both yes. And the trick, or the thing we've really got to do, is to say, once you have that experience, that can't be it. Then now you come back to your own tradition. Now you come back to Christianity and say, what does that mean now for me as a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or a secular humanist? I mean, it doesn't. But in the Christian tradition, it means I've once again had a direct experience of God. Now, how do I live? What are the fruits of that? If there's no fruits, then it was just a little fun adventure. If there's fruits of it, then there's something in there for Jesus people.
Yeah, and one of my my coach's mentors, as I was developing the framework for this podcast, kind of insisted that I always bring it back to that question. Okay, what now? What's the point? You've had this enlightened experience. You've had this awakening. What are you doing tomorrow morning? What difference does it make? Can you talk a little bit about how this experience, kind of required an anchor on, you've got the Sunday morning experience, and then Monday morning comes, and
So I came back from those two experiences at Hopkins. I'd also, right before that, led a pilgrimage to the Palestine and Israel for some parishioners. So I had that winter of 2016 was really rich. Came back from that. A friend of mine out of the blue sent me a profile for a congregation in Savannah, and I looked at it and I thought, I've been in Seattle for 8 years, and I thought, yeah, it was surprising to me that the timing of that. So the first thing I did was respond to that, and I never think this about a position, but I read that profile and thought, oh yeah, I was so clear. If I put in for this, I'm gonna get it. And it was a knowing I had, and I've never thought that, and so I was just so clear, I think. And that happened. I came to Savannah and served a congregation here for almost 5 years. But in the middle of COVID, in the fall of 2020, I went on a retreat with some friends and realized that there needed to be a place for Michael Pollan's book had come out. So now there was a cultural conversation around psychedelics. There needed to be a place for Christians to learn about psychedelics and for the psychedelic community to learn about mystical and contemplative Christianity. And so I came back from that retreat, got on the phone with some people that I knew that had some resources, and I was able to start an educational nonprofit called Ligare to do just that work. And we've been doing that almost for 5 years now. And in April will be 5 years. And that was my response to. I sat on it for 5 years. I didn't know what to do with it, and it took me about 5 years of discernment. Talking to my therapist, talking to my spiritual director, talking to my family, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the work I get to do. It's my ministry. It is my ministry, and it's sort of an extension of my priesthood in the Episcopal Church. But that's what I'm doing now, and it's life giving, and it's
probably not the kind of security you had, job security you had before, right?
No, I left a very secure, good position, but that's what and I didn't really
How did that work
choice.
out? Because that's another conversation that I'm really fascinated about, is how, we take these big leaps. Mine was into filmmaking and kind of a, church prophetic filmmaking, if that makes any sense at all. But my sense was I was in a very secure situation, but I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't, and I can't explain the kind of feeling that I had, where it was time to go, and I had to do this thing. I knew that if I didn't do this thing, then I'd be regretting it the rest of my life. So, so I had to do that, and all of this, everything kind of, things worked out. It wasn't like I just suddenly became, mega prosperous or just had this smashing success. It just worked. It just, I got grants where I shouldn't have, things, shall we say, the universe just kind of surrounded me and helped it happen, and provided me with personal connections that it's so weird. I'm back into a kind of a more secure, day-to-day lifestyle now, and the spooky things, connections out of phone calls out of nowhere, they don't happen. They just don't.
Right.
But when I was living on the edge like that every day, you have that same experience?
Yeah. Oh gosh, yes. And I there's two things that I've changed career. I've taken going to seminary at 37 was one of those. But the way I've sort of visualized in my head, and this was about Ligare too, the nonprofit I started, was I will let like rings in a circus. I'll let go of the ring I'm holding on to if I see the other one coming, and have a little bit of confidence, enough confidence to know that I can reach out and grab it. So I don't just quit a job. But I'll take a big leap when I have some sense that there's another ring to grab onto.
That's a good way of describing it.
Yeah. And so what happened to me when I made this last change I made to leave the congregation, was I had this experience of, the Quakers call it way opening, where you just, and I used to have to bang on doors to make things happen, and they never happened. And the experience I had for the first year and a half of Ligare is like walking through big, heavy stage curtains that there's some resistance, but once I walked through, it'd be into another room that had something for me. And then it was very mystical, and then into another room. And that experience happened over again. It was, to me, affirmation. It is affirmation on the path that I was being led on. I choose to follow it, but I had no idea. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that I was a pretty good community organizer. I knew how to talk to people and listen to people. And I spent a year just doing that. Zoom meetings in the middle of COVID, just like this. And 5 years later, we've got a really great organization, but I had no idea where I was headed. And it's all over scripture. Drop your nets, drop, like me in that moment. Those disciples saw, okay, there's something else to do. I don't know what it is. He's a little weird. I don't know how to do anything but fish, but I'm going to follow him. And, it wasn't easy. So nobody says it's easy when you drop your nets.
Foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Again, speaking to the crowd that may not be familiar with that, is where Jesus is explaining to somebody who wants to follow him that, that also means you're going to be homeless.
Yeah, exactly.
One way or another. You may be physically homeless and not have a home. where you may be without a home intellectually or spiritually or institutionally or something. You may have to, but you're never going to starve. It's all going to work out, which is fascinating stuff. It's the big leagues. I like to think. It's hard because you don't know what the future is going to bring. You don't know what's going to be. So, what kind of resistance have you had after you did this study? What have
Yeah.
you? What
Where am
kind of
I? Where am I homeless?
you pushed? Yeah, where are you homeless?
Well, it happened. It took a while. I mean, there was because I'd had these experiences were very legal and part of a research project. Uh, it was, and it was quiet, sort of. I mean, the Episcopal Church. There was no firm statement about psychedelics. I mean, there was an openness. I talked to my bishop about it. When I left that position, I, of course, had to. I didn't talk much about it at the church because it was still early on, and I just said I'm leaving to work on this project and uh, around mental health and spirituality, and because I thought the study was going to be released pretty soon after that, and I thought, well, that'll all fall into place. I don't need to be a distraction because it's drugs and the drug war and
A lot of stigma
I
around
mean
that. Yeah.
even moderate and liberal Christians are conservative about psychedelics and every drug but the most dangerous. Episcopalians are not conservative about alcohol, but other things. So I was going along, and then hit a pretty serious difficulty with a former intern who brought up charges through the Episcopal Church on me for conduct unbecoming a member of the clergy, which we've got pretty strict. It comes out of the clergy sex scandals of the 90s, but we've got really strict guidelines, and people use those for good, and they use them to get back at people. And I was brought up on charges for conduct unbecoming a member of the clergy. In the end, there was a big investigation
Over this study.
over my work, not the study, but over my advocacy, encouragement, support of people working with psychedelics. And so that there was a month-long investigation. In the end, the decision was either to resign my ordination or to resign my work at Ligare. That after a lot of things, that was the nub of it. And I've stuck with my ministry, and the bishop understood that. I think I seemed to understood that this was my ministry, but that was ultimately his decision to decide what the punishment was or the result. So that was last August when I made that decision, and it was harder than I thought, than I was acknowledging to myself. I was called to ordination. I was the bishop laid hands on me. I knelt in front of the altar. The Spirit moved, and so that's not undone. But my ability to practice my ministry in the Episcopal Church for now is, and I can apply to come back in if I discern that. And I'm not. So I'm sort of spiritually homeless. I mean, I'm still consider myself obviously a Christian. I can still consider myself a part of the Episcopal Church, but in a way that I'm not, don't feel that connected to, because my ministry is a one who gathers people for worship and work, works of faith. So I'm doing that in different places now. I'm doing it in my work now. So I'm practicing that ministry without being officially part of a denomination. I'm just doing pastoral care. I did a wedding where I just got a license from a mail order license, and I don't do much of that. But I did that for some people. So I'm still but I'm homeless, and that I hadn't thought about that story. That's exactly what I follow my call. And that's left me spiritually homeless.
So, and just again, a little background. Jesus is there's this little brief story where he's encountered by, I think it's 3, because everything happens in threes, in the Bible. But it's he's encountered by people who want to follow him, and one guy says, "Yeah, great, I'm down." But wait, I need to go bury my dad before I, leave on the trip to follow you. And and Jesus is harsh, man. He says, "Let the dead bury their own dead. As for you, come and follow me."
Right.
And yeah, it ain't no easy walk.
Ain't no picnic. It's not.
I
It's
always
not.
I remember when I kind of made, not a similar move, but a maybe an adjacent kind of move in my own career. The thing that I really um grieved the most, and I think it was one of the biggest spiritual lessons that I had to learn through it, was I grieved the loss of my title. I was no longer, I couldn't explain to people. My kids joked about it. It's like, yeah, we always, my kids ask, or my friends ask me what you do for a living, and I never know what to tell them. And, before I
It
was
was
the
easy.
associate pastor at
Yeah.
this church,
Right.
or I was the pastor at this church. It was like, oh, well, that's, and people make an assumption about who you are based upon the
Yeah.
title. And
Oh yeah.
that's really tough too. But yeah, the loss of title, loss of home, loss of institutional support, really. I mean,
Yeah. That.
in our denomination, there's a category for people like me. It's an appointment beyond the local church,
Right.
and there is a category. It is still, it is a way of being ordained and being in ministry in a way, but it's not this. It doesn't have the same kind of, well, the church, the denomination needs pastors, needs clergy. They've got churches and they've got pulpits and they need to fill them. And
Yeah.
I'm not one of those.
Right.
And just the feeling of the loss of title, for me, was kind of a homelessness in a way.
Yeah. We had the same.
While obtaining a home.
We
Yeah.
had the same thing. Extension of ministry. So for 4 years, I was functioning in that. Like I was not in a parish, so it was non-parochial ministry. But I was serving the church and serving people, and in my role as an ordained person. And so that was, yeah. So losing that, to kind of your point, it was a bit of loss of status in a way, or institutional support. Even though I wasn't getting any money or anything, I was still had the imprint of that. And so,
But there was something about this experience, and really, it sounds to me like it wasn't. Maybe it was kind of a crisis point. It was kind of a turning point, in your spiritual life. But it was also, there's continuity to it.
yeah,
There's a continuum, of the time that you were a child through these big gateway experiences, which, a study at Hopkins was part of that. And then, and I would even go so far as to say that the meditation retreat work
oh,
that you did before that
right.
was, part of that continuum that has led you to this place, of something that probably to you feels more true, more honest, and more rooted, but is actually, to the rest of us who are looking at you from the outside, it's not.
Are you in my
Fair
head?
enough?
Hey, you're in my, yeah, that's exactly right. And thank you actually for that. Cause that's something I sometimes forget, to really return to that, my own sense of authority about that, about my own, like my own sense of authority about the call I have to do the work I'm doing. Just like I know you, it seems like you do too, but it's got to come from, I was leaning on the institution more than I probably would like to admit, to give me a sense of authority. And it has to be checked always, but my sense of authority comes from a deeper place and it always has. And I just forgot that.
But the institution offers certainty and power and stature, and I think the deeper you go into a sincere, and it's confirmation bias here. I'm just speaking from my own experience. I'm finding confirmation in what you're saying, and an institutionalist would disagree with me. So I take it with a grain of salt. But there is certainty in an institutional life, and then there is uncertainty in this truth seeking life, and sometimes sometimes you just got to go back to the certainty. Sometimes you just got, I've had to retreat back to, I mean, right now I'm making church bulletins for a living,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not, it's nice. It keeps me connected to congregations. Which is a love of mine.
Me too.
but
Me too.
it's it's not the real work that I need to be doing. And there are times in my life where I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then other times where I'm like, I got, there's longing, there's something that's drawing me out. And I kind of feel like that's this is one of those times is where I'm starting to feel drawn back out again. And that's what this podcast is about to
Good.
a degree, but it's new pulpit for me.
Good. All God's, as a friend of mine a long time ago said, all God's children got to pay the rent. And that, I mean, so sometimes there's an ebb and flow, and then we step out and then we come back. I think it's healthy. It's just, you got to kind of be aware of what you're doing, but and I'm an institutionalist. I mean, I am. I mean, that's some of the sadness about the state of the world right now is, but most of our institutions are broken. Church is certainly broken. And I think politics is way past broken. Healthcare is broken. Education is broken. So, and the church is too. And I love the church, and I want it to be better. I always wanted it to be better. And it's doing what it can, I guess. It needs some renewal. And my original hope was to work with clergy. And I've encouraged clergy. We have a lot of clergy we have 2,100 people on our mailing list, a lot of clergy in there. And, a lot of clergy are curious about it or worked at seminary because of psilocybin. They're just don't feel safe to talk about it. But my original hope was because all of us in the study got immediate relief from burnout, which is a huge problem for any helping profession, clergy
Fascinating.
included. That was across the board. And that's
we're kind of in the wrap up phase of the conversation, but I want to hear about that.
So
I want to know about that.
And I'm not sure why that. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's some brain reasons. So it was mostly Christian, 4 rabbis, 1 Muslim woman, I think 1 or 2 Buddhists, mostly Protestant. There was a Greek Orthodox, 1 Roman Catholic, mostly Presbyterians, Episcopalians, Lutherans, one American Baptist. Without exception, I think, and at least 99% report, because you do, as part of the research, you do all these diagnostics about your mental health and your wellness and burnout. And they knew this was going to happen, I think. They really, because they'd seen it in other places, but significant decrease we had a deeper appreciation of our own ministry, which I think is what the burnout part is. A deeper appreciation of our own ministry and our own gifts, a wider appreciation of the other traditions, and a real renewed sense of calling. And the burnout comes when you feel like what you're doing doesn't matter. And I think that's where a lot of clergy, to your point, people don't listen to us, but that's really about saying, I do have something to offer. I'm trained. I've had experiences, but it's getting you fellow parishioners out of this rut. And I can help with that. I mean, the problem comes when we think we know all the answers, which clergy do sometimes too, but we do know some answers.
Actually do, but so it's probably why I'm not in a church right now. It's because nobody wants to hear that.
It's like, if you just do what I tell you to do, fools, we'd be
got a lot of problems with you people.
Yeah, but the burnout,
that's fascinating.
Yeah, that's
fascinating.
That's in the published results, which were published last May in the scientific journal of Psychedelic Medicine. So, yeah, that also applies. There's been studies with medical professionals. There's lots of studies with veterans, but it's sort of a helping profession, but not really. But medical people, therapists, clergy, social workers, teachers. And so the research around burnout and helping professions is really important. And so my original hope was just to I'd been given a gift. I wanted to pay it forward for other fellow clergy because I love my colleagues and know how hard that work is and know how thankless it can be sometimes, often. And so anyway, that was an important takeaway. And I thought that would wake the church institution up to, I really did. I thought, okay, when they see the benefit of this for burned out clergy, they will be curious, and mostly not at the highest levels. At the highest levels, parish clergy, bishops, whatever session, whatever the tradition. In ours, it's bishops, and very little, some interest. Certainly, there were a lot of Methodists in the study, so there's been some interest in the Methodist Church. 4 Episcopalians, so a little bit. Presbyterians, but it's pretty limited. And kind of what the decision I was given. So it'll happen. It'll happen, but it's slower. It's always slower than we think it's going to be.
I've been
So,
saying for my whole career that, the institution really has to break down a lot before we get to
yeah, yeah.
embodying the thing that we're really here uh, the thing that we're here on this earth to embody. That sounds like a kind of an apocalypticism, which I'm allergic to all forms of apocalypticism. But that, it does, that's a hope at least.
Well, yeah, and I thought COVID was. I mean, the word apocalypse, of course, means an unveiling to see what's going on. I really thought,
yeah.
but we don't want to look at it. Like we don't even talk about COVID now, and that millions of people died. It wrecked our economy. It wrecked our politics, and we just like, okay, done with that. That's the problem in the West.
Yeah,
one of them.
Yeah, I thought here's where my hope. I saw such potential during COVID. Before COVID, I saw so much potential in forms of ministry and even worship that could take place online. And it was your former presiding bishop, Curry. For those of you who don't know, the guy who did the royal wedding for Harry and Meghan. He did a thing for us at the National Council of Churches where it was like he was on video, but it was like he was sitting in my living room and consoling me after a death. It was amazing, absolutely amazing. And I saw the potential in that, and I thought, oh yeah, we're all online now. We're all learning these skills. We're all learning the potential. Let's go. And now, as soon as COVID was over, whoop, let's get back in the buildings. Let's get back into the limits thereof. And it's we never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. This is degenerating into a complaining session, but I don't mean it to be.
No, I don't either.
How do we connect with how do we become new subscribers to that newsletter that you're talking about?
Thank you.
How do we connect?
So the name of the organization is Ligare, Ligare. It's Latin. It means to bind or unite. It's also the root word of religion. Religion is religare, to rebind to God. So ligare.org was available when I was playing with names 5 years ago. And
that's how you do it. Yeah.
That's how you do it. And I was like, okay, there's the blessing from the internet gods.
Right.
So, but ligare.org, and we've got some resources on there, some printed things. I mean, online magazine articles and journals and videos. And so check that out. And then if you're curious more than that, sign up for our newsletter. And if you're curious beyond that, we have a membership. It's $150, but we scholarship if people need it all the way down to full scholarship. And that gives you access not just to more resources, but also the community of about 200 people who are there's spiritual directors, there's lay people, there's people that used to be Christian, there's people that want to be Christian, there's active Christian. So we do a lot of things for free, and that's all advertised on that newsletter. Right now we're doing a series on entities, which is that's a whole nother discussion, but that in psychedelic spaces, sometimes what we might call demons in Christianity, entities in the psychological term. We're doing a 7-part series on entities, and that, which is kind of new to me. So I'm enjoying that. We've got scholars and got several researchers. And so anyway, long ligare.org will give you access to a few resources, and the newsletter is where we mostly generate invitations to things and keep people up to date. The website needs to be updated. The newsletter is the most current place.
Hey, I know a guy.
I know. Thank you. I looked at your stuff. I know. I did look at your stuff. I need a big donation, but yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
In kind services sometimes are helpful.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah. This is. I feel like we got a new brother.
I know. Thank you.
This is really, really great conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
And
you're there in Maryland, and there's Hopkins is right there. There's so much out there, about this, and once people see it, they start seeing it more. But this is important. It's an important cultural conversation. The church Judaism so far much further along on this. They don't have the same baggage we do, but we've got to undo 50 years of bad policy and bad politics around drugs, around, I say cannabis, well, lots of things, but cannabis and psychedelics need to be much more understood. They're misunderstood in a really deep, unhealthy way. So, yeah.
Nixon.
So, yeah. Nixon. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Nixon and then Nancy Reagan. But yeah, it was,
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This is really helpful for me. It was really good to kind of remember some of those early calling things and remember the through line back to me being a little kid, sitting in church, wanting to be awed. And it was awe. Psychedelics can bring a sense of awe, and that's awe is the root of religion. When our ancestors first looked up to the sky and said, "Oh, wow."
Yeah.
And we've lost that. So.
All right, man.
Yeah. Have
a great one.
Thanks. You too.